The Battle of Pelennor Fields was perhaps the most important battle of the Third Age. It saw the might of Sauron's armies hurled against the walls of Minas Tirith and the combined forces of Gondor and Rohan. As you all know, the battle was a major victory for the free peoples of Middle-earth, and although it was nowhere near decisive, it was still a costly defeat for Sauron's armies. But what if it didn't happen that way? What if Sauron was victorious on the Pelennor Fields? Let's assume the battle progresses much the same way. Rohan's army arrives, Theoden is slain, but so is the Witch King of Angmar. Aragorn's southern reinforcements arrive, Prince Imrahil and Gondor's forces sally forth from Minas Tirith, but with the major change that none of this is enough. Let's say that Mordor's army rallies and they take victory upon the fields of Pelennor. So what are the immediate consequences? Firstly, and most importantly, a huge loss of leadership on the side of the Free Peoples. The vast majority of Gondor and Rohan's leadership fought in this battle, as well as other important figures such as Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, and the members of the Grey Company. The loss of so many capable, powerful figures would completely decapitate the leadership of Gondor and Rohan. Secondly, a huge loss of manpower for both kingdoms. The loss of 6,000 Rohirrim is catastrophic to say the least, and for Gondor the losses would be far higher, likely between 10 to 12,000. At this point in time, these numbers are pretty much irreplaceable and would severely limit both kingdoms' capacity to make further war. In other words, if the War of the Ring was a paradox game, then Gondor and Rohan just got stack wiped. And lastly, the loss of Minas Tirith. Not only the capital of Gondor, but also a hugely strategic position. With the gates previously destroyed by Grond and the Witch King, the city would be much more difficult to defend if the battle on the Pelennor was lost. It might take days or even weeks, but Sauron's armies would eventually take the city, even if it means bloody house-to-house fighting, and presumably everyone in the city would die or be enslaved. Okay, so this all sounds pretty bad for the Free Peoples, but what happens next? Well, to put it bluntly, and I'm sure you guessed it, it gets even worse. With Minas Tirith fallen, Sauron now has a clear path into both Gondor and Rohan. Although his losses are high, he reconsolidates his forces at Minas Tirith, bringing in reinforcements from Mordor. He then splits his army because he can totally do that at this point, one army marching through Anorian towards Rohan and the other marching through Lossarnach and Lebanon deeper into Gondor's heartland. In both cases, thousands of refugees flee westward, desperately attempting to flee Sauron's approaching hordes. Not all of these refugees are so lucky, as mounted Haradrim ride ahead of Mordor's armies, burning, pillaging, and either killing or enslaving those who are too slow to leave. Hearing of Gondor's defeat at Minas Tirith, those Corsairs and Haradrim who fled from the Oathbreakers now return to the fight, and I am sure their excuse of fleeing from spooky ghosts will go down very well with Sauron. Realizing Minas Tirith has fallen, Angbor the Fearless, Lord of Lamadan, turns his army of 4,000 men around and marches further south. His forces are joined by the survivors from the battle, as well as those who were already sailing up the Anduin. However, his army is still small in comparison to Mordor's forces, and he knows that he cannot defend Pelargir and Linhir in case he is outflanked. He instead marches his forces into Belfalas. There, he joins Prince Elvir of Dol Amroth, the new Prince of Dol Amroth, as Prince Imrahil fell at the Pelennor. They organise a defensive line from Dol Amroth in the south to Ethring in the north. It's possible at this point that Sauron might send a delegation that gives them the opportunity to surrender, but it's unlikely that they would accept because Sauron sucks. In Anorian, Sauron's forces march towards Rohan uncontested. For good measure, they also set fire to Druedan Forest because why wouldn't they, killing or driving out the remainder of the Druedain. In Rohan, Erkenbrand, presumably the highest ranking general remaining, rallies together what mounted soldiers he can. These horsemen are able to screen the refugees, sweeping away Mordor's advanced raiding parties, but they can do nothing to the bulk of Sauron's forces. With Helm's Deep undefendable due to the blasted wall, Erkenbrand rallies the last of Rohan's forces at Edoras for a final stand. Edoras, whilst defendable, is not an impenetrable fortress, and the siege lasts a mere day before the city is overrun. Should have upgraded those wooden walls to stone. In the north of Middle-earth, realizing that Gondor and Rohan cannot hold for much longer, the elves begin a mass exodus towards Lindon in an attempt to flee to Valinor. Some may call it cowardly, but I would call it smart. Elves of Lothlorien attempt to flee through the High Pass, but emboldened by Sauron's imminent victory, orcs of the Misty Mountains attack many of them, and some of those who flee do not make it to Eriador. Still, many remain behind, including the vast majority of the elves of Mirkwood under King Thranduil. These elves are safe for the time as Dol Guldur has been completely emptied of armies, but Sauron will eventually come for them from Mordor in time. At this point, it's worth talking about the One Ring. Without Aragorn's army providing a distraction outside the Black Gate, Sauron's forces aren't pulled north, meaning the path to Mount Doom for Frodo and Sam isn't clear. There's a very high likelihood that they are captured and Sauron retrieves the One Ring. However, that's not to say that there isn't a chance they might still reach Mount Doom and destroy the ring. A very, very low chance, but still possible. In that case, Sauron will be destroyed, but everyone important is already dead, so who's going to celebrate? But for this scenario, we're assuming the worst pretty much always happens, so Sauron is successful in reclaiming the One Ring. In Erebor, the men of Dale and the dwarves of Durin's folk still hold against the Easterling army, but at this point supplies are dwindling and the writing is on the wall. Never one to surrender, the dwarves sally forth in a final, desperate assault against the Easterlings and are likely joined by the men of Dale. But without Sauron's defeat, the Easterlings' resolve is still high, and the dwarves and the men of Dale are defeated and become tributaries and slaves to the Easterling hordes. Back in Gondor, the defensive line from Dol Amroth to Ephring holds for a time, but is eventually broken through by Sauron's forces. Dol Amroth is besieged, whilst Gondor's other few remaining defenders fall back deeper into Gondor's territory, first to Callambel, and then into the Blackroot Vale. The siege of Dol Amroth is a long, costly fight for Sauron's forces, but with the sea blockaded by the returning corsairs of Umbar, the city is unable to resupply. Finally, Dol Amroth falls, and with it falls the last of Gondor's leadership and any chance of defending their land. With their backs against the wall, Gondor's remaining defenders and those that can still escape either flee into the White Mountains or deep into Andrast. These few enclaves may hold out for a few years, or maybe even a few decades, but they are irrelevant to Sauron. Gondor has now fallen, and its remaining people are either killed or enslaved under Sauron. Refugees streaming from Gondor and Rohan now pour through the Gap of Rohan, or through Andrast into Eriador. These lands are savage and untamed, and many perish deep in the wilderness. Others are attacked by the Dunlendings, who realise that this is a perfect opportunity to reclaim their lost territory. A significant amount of the tens of thousands of refugees fleeing Gondor and Rohan perish in this journey, and only a few of them make it into the civilized lands of central Eriador, where the men of Bree and the hobbits of the Shire are still blissfully ignorant to what has happened in the south. These peoples are safe, for the time being, but Sauron's forces will eventually arrive in Eriador, and at this point, there's nothing anyone can do to stop him. The rest of the tale isn't really worth telling. It may take Sauron months, or it may even take him years, but eventually he will become master of all of Middle-earth. The elves will flee into the west, the dwarves who survive will lock themselves in their mountain halls, and all the men who oppose Sauron will be oppressed for years to come, and will be forced to acknowledge Sauron as their god and their king. This would be Middle-earth's eternal fate, unless the Valar choose to intervene a second time and save Middle-earth from darkness once again, or unless the Hobbit clone army is unleashed from the basement of the Green Dragon. But you didn't hear that from me. But that didn't happen. The end of the Third Age was bittersweet in many ways, but it was nothing like the dark future that I just described. And that's fantastic, because even though I love gritty, realistic stories, I also like epic tales with a happy ending, and I'm sure many people do as well. This is my first video where I explore alternative histories of Middle-earth, and it was fun. And also a little bit depressing, at least this topic anyway. Fun and depressing don't really go together. I want to do more videos like this, so leave suggestions in the comments. I can't say it will be a regular series like War in Middle-earth, but I'll need something new because I'm running out of army-sized videos. Anyway, thank you for watching, stay well, and remember, I don't really have a message for this video, so goodbye.